All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the ZGC 2021 Lunar New Year event. It's the year of the metal ox, and I'd like to welcome Debbie Lynn and Orrin Ailloni-Charas, and thank Ella, the CEO of ZGC Capital Corp, who put this whole event together. We have the panelists are going to introduce themselves, and then we're going to ask them some questions. Okay, if you want to go ahead, Dr. Debbie.
Hi, everyone. My name is Debbie Lynn. I am Executive Director at Boehringer Ingelheim Venture Fund. The company is a large pharmaceutical company based in Germany. In the US, we have headquarters in Ridgefield, Connecticut. We are a global company, privately held, one of the top 20. The venture fund is a fund that started off with 100 million euro in investments. We now have 500 million under management. And we invest both in therapeutics as well as digital health. I sit on the digital health side of the fund. Been with the company for more than 13 years in a variety of roles, starting from medical to health economics, over to strategy and development, and now over the venture fund. I've been here for about 3 years. So I lead the digital health efforts in North America, and I'm really glad to be here. Nice to meet you.
Orrin, would you like to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you, Ella and team, for having me today. It's exciting to be here. Happy Chinese New Year. My name is Orrin Ailloni-Charas. I am the managing partner of the Global Health Impact Fund. We're an early stage venture capital firm, only investing in healthcare, Series C to Series B. I'm also a doctor. I've been an anesthesiologist for about 30 years here now in the Bay Area, and have just recently retired full-time, and I'm in the venture program only full-time, sorry. We invest in early stage healthcare, primarily in our referral and device, and we're starting to raise our second fund now.
Okay, you ready for I didn't introduce myself. My name is Marisa Almo-McGinnis. I'm a managing director at Golden Seeds, and also I'm an LP with Bloomberg Capital. I'm an investor in about 25 companies. My current healthcare investment is RX, which is in Santa Clara, and I'm honored to be here. So I'm going to start with the first question. Our first question is, what are the benefits of AI in the healthcare industry? Dr. Debbie?
Let's make this a little bit more interactive. So I'm going to invite Orrin and yourself to kind of chime in here. So, I mean, it's a very, very broad question, right? AI in healthcare. I mean, we have everything from, so I guess maybe I would start with, what does AI mean to me? Because I think people may define it differently. And simply put, for me, it's learning algorithms, algorithms that can make insight and learn and be predictive, I think, in lay language, in my mind. And so, and you can think of AI in application in anything from, for example, making use of images and using algorithms to derive insight as to, for example, putting stroke patients in the right categories. So we have currently a company that we've invested in called Brainomics that helps physicians make decisions by looking at images of brain scans as to determining whether or not they have an ischemic stroke or a hemorrhagic stroke, so they can put them on the right medications. So for me, that would be an example of a learning algorithm that looks at images much faster than a human can go through to make intelligent insights quickly and allow the physician or whoever is making the decision to make the right treatment decision. So that's one benefit, is supplementing our slower pace of and not as exact pace to make intelligent decisions that are systematic and that can catch human error. So that's one example. I'll ask others to weigh in here because it's a very, very big question, a big topic.
Yeah, I'll jump in then, Debbie. I think that was great, and that's a terrific definition. It's always so hard to come up with a nice, clear definition of what artificial intelligence is. I agree with what you're saying. I think decision support is a big area. I think we see it in the hospital, not so much that physicians and caregivers can be replaced, but they can be provided with actionable information at the right time to assist them in making the best decisions. One area that I think is ripe for artificial intelligence integration is telemedicine. The more we have a lot of healthcare deserts in this country, a lot of areas, even in urban centers, that don't get adequate healthcare coverage. People can't get to the doctor's office. They just don't, they just don't have that access for whatever reason. Artificial intelligence can create extension into the home by providing not just tools, but some sort of algorithmic oversight of patients, and then surface the most serious cases to a doctor's office. I think that will be very big.
Yeah, so another thing I want to also add in is we know AI is definitely revolutioning the whole healthcare industry. And at this time during pandemic, also one of the largest contribution is it definitely accelerated the vaccine development. So when looking at the historic timeline to develop a drug from discovery to approval process, it usually takes 5+ years. But with the AI right now, it's amazing. The current timeline is cut to less than 1 year. And this is like a fantasy for all the scientists like 1 year ago. And this all thanks to all this application of AI and also this automation process. And also another big application of AI use is besides diagnosis is also drug target identification. So when we looking at all this drug development process, one of the critical part is also to screen all this compound and also preclinical candidates. So now AI, we can screen a big virtual compound library with like billions of molecules out there. And also we can identify all these preclinical candidates in a really quick, shorter time. And also Orrin also mentioned, and also Debbie also mentioned about its use in a way to helping physician making a decision for treatment plan. That is also a really a big thing, like IBM's Watson, Google's DeepMind. They are all the good examples to process data that are generated from all the different resources and give treatment recommendation to physician. But of course, we can also discuss and go on discuss about why the Watson platform was somehow not really favored by the physician by just simply thinking it can replace a doctor's role in treating patients is definitely not there yet. So we definitely need to also consider that AI is not really a solution for everything, but definitely it can help diagnosis process, drug development process, also play important role in all this patient care image analysis. Yeah, so something to add to, yeah.
Okay, I'm just going to add a quick one based on one of the companies I saw. There is currently a company, it's in Santa Clara, and it's working on artificial general intelligence. And what they are working on is having an avatar that would be a doctor. And that speaks to what Orrin was talking about, where you have these deserts where you can't reach patients. And so they could have this avatar and speak any language and help diagnose patients that otherwise would not be able to get to a physician. Are we ready for the next question? And I think Orrin briefly touched on this. So we're going to start with you. And what are the advantages of telemedicine for the patients and the doctors?
Yeah. Okay, well, I'll start. So telemedicine is a really great tool. For many years, we were trying to get it started, get doctors to adopt it in their offices, get patients to use it. Pandemic is that and you know, the doctors couldn't go into their offices. So all of a sudden we had telemedicine and people started to adopt it and see it create. So it became a really good tool to continue, you know, create continuity of care. And all of a sudden there was this great big movement to adopt telemedicine. So we've seen a lot of investment this past year in telemedicine solutions, a lot of growth in that area. And it's very exciting. My fund has been involved with telemedicine for a couple of years. And so we felt like we were fortunate enough to be in front of this trend. And I think it will continue to grow. And so the point I made earlier is that, you know, traditional telemedicine, as we've seen it, has been glorified Zoom experiences, which is, it's incomplete at best. And there's, you know, obviously, what we need to do is expand that sort of a telemedicine 2.0 or 3.0, where we can provide adequate diagnostics, specialty pathways for cardiologists, orthopedic surgeons, really create a more bespoke experience. The benefit to that is that, again, we're going to be able to scale the access of healthcare to a much greater range of people.
Yeah, I think I can chime in there. Basically, I think Orrin is right, is that, you know, telemedicine glorified Zoom. I love how you put that, because that was sort of the 1.0, but with COVID kind of creating, you know, this bubble for all of us, whereby we have to be in our homes. Obviously, there's more acceptance for the use of wearables. And so as people start to accept the use of wearables, and in the form of Fitbits and Apple Watches and all sorts of things, I think that this is starting to create a bigger appetite for the capability of remote monitoring of patients, which I find terrifically exciting, tremendously exciting. Especially in the case where you start to gather biomarkers for understanding human physiology in ways that which we could never have done before. So a biomarker could be newly defined in the space of cardiac care or respiratory care, for example, in sort of ways that we've never really thought about. And of course, biomarker development takes years and years and years, but since we have now the capability of getting so much data, then it's understanding how we kind of validate those biomarkers, and how we maybe allow for maybe new and faster regulatory processes to get these biomarkers accepted. But the use of remote monitors certainly creates more of an opportunity for all of these technologies and wearables to be accepted, as well as new biomarker development. So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah. I think this is also a really good question, since our last question is about application of AI in healthcare. And telemedicine is definitely one of the most popular user case of AI in the field, especially during the pandemic. And there are recent a lot of policy changes to decrease the entry barrier for telemedicine companies to start their business, which also later can promote, well, actually it's already happening, promote its use as a way to deliver all these clinical services to the general population. So when we're talking about telemedicine, actually it's 2 ways. One is the real-time synchronous telemedicine. The other is the asynchronous way. You collect or store data, the message at one point, and also get a response later at a later point. So for the synchronized medicine, actually for that category, it not only includes the communication between physicians and also startups, but it also can occur between healthcare providers, which is very, very valuable, such as a primary care physician would virtually consulting with a specialized doctor seeking for a better treatment plan. And that is definitely beneficial for the whole community. And we all know the benefits of all the telemedicine to help provide a convenient way and also to help those who have a difficulty accessing all these medical resources because of the distance or disability or because of like living in the rural area with senior people. So, and also decrease the waiting time for patients to see a doctor significantly. Before it may take weeks, and with the telemedicine use, it can see the doctor in a much shorter time. But of course, there's also limitation for the use of telemedicine. So for instance, the regulatory rules are changing state by state. And of course, some patients would have limited access to all the technological device, therefore have difficulty using telemedicine. But another issue I would like to talk about is only specific to the healthcare data, which is a patient's privacy and the security. So before pandemic, the traditional or conventional way to protect patients' privacy in telemedicine actually is using the identification method is to blur a patient's face. However, the direct consequence is somehow it will meanwhile also block the facial expression of all the patients, which may be helpful, which can be also helpful and also beneficial in later clinical use, for instance, in the neurologist assessment. So there are some companies, I have also looked at actually one company from China, they're working on the programs, to develop some programs and also some algorithm, try to find out a solution. So instead of using the traditional simple method to completely block patient's face, they are using AI to swamp patient's face, so that it can not only de-identify patients, but also can preserve all this facial movement. And also another point I want to say is, I personally do not really think the high demand of telemedicine would persist in the same level as during pandemic, but definitely telemedicine is on its way to make a big impact in healthcare industry.
Oh, and this is a follow-on to Dr. Debbie's mentioning of wearables, giving a lot of information to the doctors. There are what I call internables, and these are devices that can go inside of the patients. I've seen a startup recently. It's in a pill form, and it has a camera, and then it can be used like a robot, so it can be controlled, and then obviously, you know, it goes out. And so this can provide information. For example, a good substitute for an esophageal exam, and a lot of other types that are invasive. Okay. Oh, Orrin, were you going to say something? You're going to add?
Sorry, yeah, I was just going to add to what Ella said. I agree that the demand will probably diminish if and when things return to normal in society with respect to the pandemic, the demand for telemedicine. But I think what we have to understand, and I'm not sure we've done a good job at that yet, is understanding a consumer need, the consumer use case and the consumer user experience. I think, you know, we've had a lot of professionals and they make Zoom. But how is it if you're somebody who needs to use telemedicine because you don't have access otherwise? What is it that puts you in a category that needs it? Is it a socioeconomic issue? Is it an age-related issue? And how does that impact the way you interact with technology in your home? I know, for example, if you take an elderly patient who has some degree of dementia, who needs home care, how is that person going to interact with the technology? And is the technology going to be developed in a way that advances that user experience rather than inhibits it. And I think that's really going to be critical. And that forces us to think about the consumer in a way in healthcare that we don't typically do. So it'll be a very interesting challenge.
I can say that from a pharmaceutical perspective, the idea of patient engagement, while you would think that that is a core, really has been, I would say, a more recent kind of topic. And so you're alluding to the fact that, you know, you really need to understand the consumer or the patient use case, how they use it, what the form factors are, whether or not they can use it. Is it plug and play, or do you require, I don't know, lots of training and things like that? Those are sort of keys to any technology success in the home. And I think finally we're starting to kind of really understand and examine what that means and what all that entails. It's not as simple as I think you might think it is, right? We might think it is.
Right.
And you triggered one use case for me, actually, is the idea of expanded access programs for people who have exhausted all possibilities. Let's say cancer patients who have exhausted all their cancer treatments and are looking for new modalities. So in the past, basically, you have tumor boards, and tumor boards obviously are made up of doctors who know exactly what they're doing and have read all the literature, we hope, right? And so they might put then the person on a certain regimen and hope they do best, do well. And then with these expanded access programs, if they were in, there's a company I'm thinking about in Canada called XCures. And what they do is they hope to have this sort of IBM Watson for expanded access, whereby when you, let's say, I'm just pulling this completely out of the hat. So let's say you use Lipitor and you on a cancer patient, and this one cancer patient responds very well because they have certain genetic features that allow Lipitor to work on them for their cancer. I know it's not necessarily physiologically right, but I'm just using this as an example. And so then they might be in Kentucky. So no one, only the tumor board in Kentucky knows about this. But the tumor board in, I don't know, this other patient is in San Francisco, and they have the same characteristics as this patient in Kentucky. How do they find out about this person's remarkable recovery off of Lipitor? Using sort of telemedicine and AI and sort of the ability to connect people from various geographies. You know, this might be a reality one day, is that this end of one case in Kentucky now knows is sort of reachable, right? You can actually understand what happened to this patient and learn and maybe use this treatment on another person who has the same phenotype or genotype.
Well, that's, Debbie, I couldn't agree with you more. The DeSiloing of information is so critical. We're trying to do that at our sister network, Global Health Impact Network, by bringing doctors, nurses, pharmacists, any clinician to the table to collaborate, educate, and innovate together. And I think programs like the accelerator program that Ella talked about with ZGC, you know, we have to de-silo these things. I love to tell the story. Many of you are probably, some of you are probably at least too young to remember this, but when the HIV was first coming around, we didn't even call it HIV. And it was not a singular university. It was not a singular institution that solved this problem. It was a collective of institutions, including locally here, UCSF was very involved, to figure out what was happening and how to treat it. It was not entirely new, you know, viral phenomenon. And we did that. And today, HIV/AIDS is a treatable, livable disease process, whereas when I was in training, it was deadly and awful. And that de-siloing is critical for the information. And so we have to endeavor to do that. I think that you'll see a lot more of that as we go forward.
Yeah, so one thing to add, I totally agree with Orrin. So I believe also one of the future trend after pandemic time is a further collaboration. And when we're talking about the collaboration, first we're talking about from geography perspective. We will have more collaboration, for instance, clinical trial in other part of the world, conducting all this trial in all different sites, like global wise. And we telemedicine can definitely help the process to progress much faster, and even can help to bridge the expertise from different areas, for instance, from biotech companies versus to the experts from, for instance, medical imaging or data processing to, so to input the data all together, collect data all together, telemedicine definitely would make a huge impact.
Okay, what is the impact of COVID-19 in the healthcare venture world regarding technology, investments, and funding of startups? Ella, we'll let you go first.
Yeah, so it's, everybody know, like the whole global startup ecosystem has hugely impacted by all this pandemic. When we're looking at this number since the start of all this crisis, VC funding from a global scope has dropped by like 20%, and 70% of the company startup experienced the revenue fall. And in healthcare industry, from the operational level, it's also the similar thing. A lot of clinical trial sites have slowed or stopped its operation, trying to struggling to deal with all this pandemic. But despite of all this operational disruption, we also want to look at opportunities brought by the pandemic to especially healthcare industry. So unlike other industry that faces a huge challenges of fund raising, healthcare industry, actually, if you're looking at the number, we're seeing a record high in capital raised last year. When we look at the biotech industry, for instance, just look at the number, second quarter of 2020, about $4.2 billion were poured into biotech sector, which was in the United States, which was just slightly lower than the pre-pandemic time. And also from a global perspective, US, however, is still the big player in the healthcare industry, receiving 2/3 of the funding global-wise. And inside the country, in the United States, San Francisco or California and also Boston are, or California and Massachusetts are still the top 2 largest hubs for biotech innovation, receiving 60% of funding. So that hasn't been changed. So another change I believe our panelists may have all noticed that is VC have been doubling down on the investment. Actually, not only VC, but also the LP for the funding for the venture, also doubling down on their investment and more willing to commit more capital on existing projects. We have those like a late stage mature healthcare or biotech company will still continue to go public, but are in a much slower pace. And even though we talk about all this operational disruption, the clinical trial may be stopped or slowed down, but the pandemic also can cause the new demand or high demand of new drugs to be developed. So like last year, for instance, about 1/4 of new grant went to therapeutic and also vaccine development that was targeting at COVID-19. So there's also a hype regarding the funding in the healthcare sector. So we always saying challenges and also opportunities are always going together. So that is also an opportunity for healthcare investors.
Orrin, do you have anything to add?
You know, if you look at companies operationally, I think maybe that would be a little different because I covered the macro so well. Operationally, companies had challenges this year. You know, one of the benefits of early stage healthcare companies that are going through the regulatory process is that they're not revenue dependent. So as businesses dried up, their business didn't change from a capital intake as long as they had investment and runway. But then getting that next investment in many cases proved more challenging, and they couldn't execute, they couldn't meet milestones. And so the question is, if you're not meeting milestones and you're burning through dollars and you need to go out to the markets and raise more money, do you change your valuation? Do you drop your valuation? What happens to your existing investors? So I think from a financial standpoint, this was a very difficult year for companies, early stage companies. However, because they're not revenue dependent, that impact that really affected most companies didn't affect the companies in our space. Beyond that, as Ella said, it was very difficult to execute trials, clinical trials, pilot studies. So it was very difficult to meet milestones if you were early and you depended on outside organizations. So the companies that did the best were the ones that had a good war chest or a lot of powder, in the bank that they could, get through all of these months of pandemic and execute their visions. And if they didn't need to be together to do that, if they could do that virtually, that was even better. On the other hand, I think there's a real tailwind that gets created by all of this. There's a renewed enthusiasm for all of health tech, all of healthcare innovation. We've been, so impressed by the scientists that developed all of these vaccines so quickly. There's been a lot of money being poured into the sector for innovation. And there's a lot of sort of micro innovation around coronavirus solutions and innovation around telemedicine that came out of nowhere and created all sorts of new, microeconomies. So hopefully some of that will stay with us, and the renewed interest will keep capital in the space and drive innovation. And ultimately, what we're interested in is not just a return on investment, but really making a difference in the application of healthcare and helping people live better and healthier lives. I think we're good at moving in that direction.
Yeah,
Debbie, would you like to add?
Yeah, so I wanted to add a little bit about what Orrin talked about. I think around the tailwind, I think that the education of the broad public around clinical trials and what clinical trials are in the first place. I don't really think not many people knew so much about clinical trials and what was involved. So I think in terms of education and patient understanding I think people now know I think people might know what consent is, or maybe what IRBs are, maybe how long a clinical trial takes, what's all involved. I think that's definitely very, very positive for healthcare. Also, the shift to virtual trials. So I had some of my companies shift over to doing virtual trials, sending out their wearable technologies to patients and conducting the trials completely virtual. That's definitely a big change. And for those companies who could do that and who were lucky to do that, that was a very good capability. And then they needed to think a lot about how they changed their narrative in order to demonstrate value inflections. Like, could we generate more value in this time of big change, and the fact that they have maybe dry powder, but they might not be able to execute the complete trial? What is the narrative, and how do we support that narrative once we need to get to our next series? So with new maybe potential value propositions. So I think it encouraged a lot of flexible thinking and also use of new modalities of doing things. So yeah.
Oh, and then what I noticed with a lot of these are the early stage startups that were in healthcare. The FDA has always been a big barrier for healthcare companies. And now what they're doing is they're kind of tweaking their focus to COVID, because that way they're able to get the emergency FDA approval. And so that's going to speed up a lot of the approvals for these companies that would have spent months and many thousands of dollars trying to get through the FDA.
Yeah, you wonder if that will end up having a reverse effect if something gets through and causes problems.
Well, we know that's going to happen.
Well, we would assume, right? So then will that ultimately be a problem for us? Hopefully not.
No, because it's difficult times.
Okay.
Okay, this is the last question. What do you see as future trends in healthcare post-pandemic? Okay, Dr. Debbie?
I think we touched upon this already. I mean, the adoption of telemedicine, obviously, we talked about the new use of virtual trials, modalities of using remote monitors. I talked about biomarker development. I'm a big proponent of that. I think those are the major ones that come to mind for me. Others?
Orrin, you want to start?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, okay, so I think Debbie mentioned from technology perspective, I totally agree. The application of AI, the telemedicine for all this wearable device, but also, for instance, in biotech sectors, the gene editing cell therapy that already been here for many years, and the rapid adoption in microfluidics, such as working on the chip or lab on the chip technologies. Those are all rising quickly. Some other technologies are also being adopted rapidly, such as biosensor or 3D bioprinting. I think these are also going to become more and more popular. And another example is, we all know the famous DNA and RNA vaccines, such as like mRNA vaccine developed by Moderna. They compared to the traditional protein-based vaccine, they are more dominant because of their high scalability and also their protected power. So in addition to technology, I just now I mentioned about, I believe the collaboration will be also another future, becoming more important in future world of post pandemic time in healthcare industry, not only from geography perspective, but also like in a multi field, bring experts from different sides together. But another impact I want to mention is the investment patterns, and I believe that pattern would also continue even after the crisis or pandemic times. So in the past, most of the investors are, including myself, are reluctant to talk with company or invest in company that are not really from local. But now investors are like start to realize they can still build greater relationships with the startups that are far away, and that is really a good thing. From startup, they have more opportunities to access more funding resources, and for VC, we would have more diverse deal sourcing that can include investment opportunities from in a global range. And some investors also considering to use drones to observe some manufacture facilities in other locations. So I really think even after the pandemic, this whole investment pattern may also persist and also continue.
That's cool. You guys mentioned everything I would have mentioned, so I'll piggyback. I'll say that I think that we'll see a greater integration of remote patient monitoring with telemedicine. It'll be more seamless. It'll be more accessible to physicians and more usable for people. I think you'll see a lot of artificial intelligence and machine learning platforms that will help create sort of home care, healthcare. I think that will be very big. And I agree. I think it's always about using the best technologies to do what we have always done. And so if you can imagine what's coming down, like with artificial intelligence, improving radiological and pathological diagnoses, we're starting to see a lot more of that now. And I think that will continue to grow in the next 5 to 10 years and become quite prevalent.
There are two areas that we haven't really talked about that I've seen big development in, and one is with the DNA sequencing, with the long read sequencing. And post-pandemic, the prices are dropping dramatically. And so this will allow personalized medicine. And if you can get read the whole genome for a very inexpensive amount. And then right now they're looking at a target of maybe $100 to $200 to get these algorithms using something like Google's deep variant synthesis base. And then the other area that I've seen a lot of work in is 3D printing for example, face shields, respirators, medical devices, and testing devices. And this is increasing again as the price goes down.
Definitely.
Okay, so that is those are our questions for today, and the answers were excellent. Thank you, Ella. Thank you, Orrin, and thank you, Debbie. And I hope the
Thank you.
audience learned something. I'm sure they did and enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed doing this. Happy New Year.
Happy
Thank you
New
very
Year.
much.
Thank you.